everyone. I'm Amanda Watson. I'm the Assistant Dean for the Law Library and Information here at Harvard Law School, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our last book talk of the fall. And it is The Quiet Coup, Neoliberalism and the Looting of America by Mehrsa Baradaran. You can get a print copy of this book from the Harvard Coop right outside the door or over across, or check it out from the library. I want to thank Dean Goldberg's office for his generous support of the Faculty Book Talk series, as well as our librarians, Lisa Ryden, Sarah Newberg, Alethea Jones, and Maya Bergamesco for their assistance. Before we get started, please make sure that your phone is off. Nothing on your body is going to make noise, so we all turn and stare at you. We are joined today by Mehrsa Baradaran, who is the Robert Braucher Visiting Professor of Law at Harvard Law School and a Professor of Law at the University of California, Irvine School of Law. She teaches and writes about banking law, financial inclusion, inequality, and the racial wealth gap. I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll have questions later. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Especially my 1Ls who have to hear from me 2 days a week and again, so extra bonus lecture. Thank you. Okay, so the book is about what has become this like amorphous topic called neoliberalism. You know, you can hear about neoliberalism on like Bo Burnham's special or like White Lotus, and you know, it has come to mean everything and nothing at the same time. But as historians and political theorists will say, it is the dominant political ideology or political order, according to Gary Gersel, of our time, which is why it's hard to see and define. It's hard to see the order that you're swimming in, right? And so I'm gonna try to tease that out in the lecture, and this is the purpose of the book. The origins of the term actually come from Milton Friedman in a 1951 essay, A Neoliberalism and Its Prospects. And Milton Friedman's actually a key figure in neoliberalism. And he defines neoliberalism as a sort of new liberalism, and really it's a focus on markets over government. Okay, that's what it says it is. It's an economic theory that favors maximum individual liberty, and by prioritizing market rules over sort of government ordering, that would deliver sort of individual liberty, world peace, and shared prosperity. The dominant theory of academics about neoliberalism is that it is a sort of reaction to communism and Keynesianism that is an economic theory, that it is born in the 1940s through the Mont Pelerin Society. Hayek writes Road to Serfdom after, in response to the Soviet takeover of communism in Russia, and that's how it starts. And then it reaches its apotheosis in the 1980s in the Reagan-Thatcher regime with, tax cuts, privatization, greed is good, capitalism, finance, etc. The critics of neoliberalism tend to agree that it is an economic theory that is synonymous with capitalism. And so the critics would say, okay, the antidote to neoliberalism is something like progressive economics or socialism, something like that. So one of the things that the critics and the proponents of neoliberalism do agree on is that it is an economic theory, okay? And that it is anti-Keynesianism or anti-socialist. So in my book, I actually do a little revisionist history of neoliberalism. And I make two claims about it. One, that it is not an economic theory, but it is about the law, okay? Neoliberalism's battleground was in the law. It starts in a legal crisis that starts in the 1950s, which I'll talk about, and it becomes social policy. It was intended as such, and the law, at a fundamental level, there's no such thing as a market without law, so that's one, right? You can't talk about money or contracts. What we talk about, right? What is the contract is the basic rubric of the market, and the law defines what a contract is. Take that across the board: property, assets, capital. All of that needs the law to define it, prescribe it, and extend it. So one, it's a legal project, and two, it is not. How do you 1944 to 1980s, right? Is a long range from the original neoliberal meeting in Mont Pelerin to be about anti-Soviet to Reagan is when it gets effectuated. Okay, that's the typical theory. And I'm saying it's not that. It is not a response to socialism. It's not a response to the Keynesian New Deal. It is a response to the civil rights era and the global justice era. Okay, neoliberalism is the new close of empire. through a new legal order and a new legal justification. So the short of it is that the end of empire and the logic of empire led to a legal crisis across the Western world, and the neoliberal order is what remedies the crisis, but the crisis is not resolved, and it is now imploding under its own sort of hypocrisy. So let me start with the legal crisis. The vehicles in the park, no vehicles in the park. Have you done this? Okay, yes, you did. Okay, I did too. My first week in law school, the no vehicles in the park comes from the Hart-Fuller debate. It is the most famous legal debate of all time, basically. There's even a debate about what the debate was about, okay? And it happened at Harvard Law School in the 1950s, and no vehicles in the park is one of the things that they debated on. The Hart-Fuller debate is about the nature of law, right? What is the foundation of the law? Like, is there something out there, some higher moral code to which the law has to sort of connect, or is the law just whatever is on the books, right? As my teenager would say, it's not that deep, okay? So that's Hart's position. It's not that deep. Hart asserts that law and morality can exist independently, meaning a legal system may contain unjust laws that are still valid as laws. So if you see a sign that says no vehicles in the park, you don't need to go through like a whole big rigmarole of like, oh, how did it get there? And what is the morality of it? It just says no vehicles. That means no buses, no cars. We understand that as it is. Okay, he maintained that the existence of the law does not require moral approval. Fuller, on the other hand, believed that the law is inherently tied to morality. He argued that for the law to be legitimate, they must adhere to certain moral principles, such as fairness and justice. So that's like a natural law position out there. I'm oversimplifying it. There has been so many debates about this debate that you can go on for days and days. Okay. So they hinge it on the no vehicles in the park and play around with this hypothetical. But actually the origin of the debate was a Nazi case where this woman who wanted to get rid of her husband during the Nazi regime, maybe was, I think she was cheating on him, whatever. She turns him in to the Nazi regime for talking bad about Hitler, and they put him away in the camps to die. He survives, he comes back, and he sues her in the newly established court system, okay? And on appeal, the German court of criminal law held that the wife is guilty, right? Since she utilized out of free choice a Nazi law, right, which is contrary to the sound conscience and sense of justice of all decent human beings about the death or imprisonment of her husband. Okay, so what she did was lawful at the time. She used a law, but that law itself was against human conscience. Okay, so there was something above the law. Okay, that's the motivating background to something like this. How do you reconcile Nazi law after the fact, okay? But actually, I think the debate has a more close to home impetus, which is the most famous case that was happening during that time, Brown versus Board of Ed, which overturned a legal order that was the reigning law of the land, that was precedent, that was hinged on the Constitution, right? That was the law. There was no legal basis to overturn this law. It was just, the court decided, immoral. It was wrong, okay? It was harmful to children. That's it, okay? So this is the legal crisis of the 1950s. How do you then reestablish, what stakes do you put in the law once you've had a whole Jim Crow system? By the way, the Nazi law was based on the Jim Crow system. It was based on the reservation system here, okay? So and then it kind of ends, right? And then what do you do? So this was the end, this is the end of 500 years of empire in the 1950s, right? So for 500 years, a handful of European nations controlled the entire world. Okay, there were only 8 or 10 countries that were never colonized during this time. And during that time, laws and institutions were erected for hundreds of years that justified this order through law, through institutional, apparatuses, through, corporate documents, and through legal theories. And these legal theories shifted over time. At first, it's like, well, Christianity decreed it. Then it is sort of natural law, some amorphous like God of nature. Then it is pseudoscience, right? Some pseudo-Darwinian blah, 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 racial hierarchy. And then the Nazis pick up all of this garbage and, put it to use in a maniacal sort of violence on Europe itself, okay? Hannah Arendt, when she studies the origins of totalitarianism, says the origins of totalitarianism were in colonization, okay? Aimé Césaire, a Martinican anti-colonial writer, says the Nazis were a symptom of a European continent sick with colonization. You do not justify plunder and murder of other people based on racial hierarchy and not have that boomerang back at home. So that's Foucault's idea of an imperial boomerang. You put out there, you justify, and it comes home, okay? And that legal order then ends, okay? You can no longer justify colonization based on racial dominion after it has wrought so much, in the Holocaust, right at their doorstep, okay? And it ends in, again, unfathomable violence. And so where is the law left after that? There are new there's a birth of international law, okay? You have the Geneva Conventions, the Bretton Woods system, and a new way that nations are going to deal with each other. And then there was the period of decolonization. So, going back to that map, okay? So if you think about, the end of World War II, going from the 1940s until, mid-50s, until, in the decade of the 60s, every single country is decolonized. Every single country has a civil war, a coup, or some anti-colonial revolt, right? Africa itself, all of the nations of Africa basically gain their freedom from their colonizers in the decade of 1960. Every country I go through, it's like, it's amazing. South America, the Middle East, the China, Cultural Revolution, the Indo-Pakistani War, every nation has an incredibly disruptive civil war or an anti-colonial revolt during a single decade. And then you have this cross-pollination of revolutionary ideas. Martin Luther King calls, and it's here, Martin Luther King, W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, all the civil rights activists here connect their struggle to the global rights movement, right? Martin Luther King calls the civil rights movement a child of a storm, okay? You have, the OPEC conference going against the Seven Sisters oil companies. You've got a real sort of attempt to redefine global power. Some of it is violent, a lot of it is not. There's a lot of meetings happening during this time. And then there's the Mont Pelerin Society also, right? There are people who are motivated in keeping the structures of empire where they are, right? It is more of a defense of the status quo. One of the things that happens between the 50s and the 60s is instead of the nations, right, controlling these like colonial states, it turns into corporations, right? So these are the Seven Sisters oil companies at the time, and this was one of the bigger sort of economic standoffs of the time. OPEC, which is the oil nations, versus the Seven Sisters, and this becomes the real debate, okay, of the 60s economically, because while empire lost its alibi, it didn't lose its motive. Okay, and the motive had always been to get oil or copper or diamonds exclusively and without having to pay for it in a market price. So first, the tactics of the neoliberal sort of collective become a sort of instead of, as these nations are asking for sovereignty, and as the domestic and global civil rights movements are saying, one person, one vote, right? They're trying to extend democracy domestically and then internationally extend global power. The counter-revolutionary forces, the sort of anti-freedom fighters, want to fight that, but without sort of fighting that directly. You cannot use racial domination anymore as a theory. And so where it goes is, yes, instead of freedom, market freedom, okay? Instead of, something like black power, black rights, black capitalism. I've talked about that extensively in my last book, right? And in this book, I follow it along to show, look, instead of sharing democracy and sharing sovereign power, the power moves into corporations and the money power. Instead of sharing democracy, it ends. Not just abroad, because you cannot do coups on other people's democracies without that boomeranging back at home. Okay, and that's one of the things that happens during this era, is as all of these nations are revolting to try to get these corporate powers out, there's all sorts of, secret coups, and those secret coups are justified, right? Through the same sort of logic that empire was justified, but without the racial overtones, and that also boomerangs back home into our own democracy, and I'll show that in a little bit, okay? So one example I use in the book is Nader's Raiders. So at one point in the 1970s, half of Harvard Law was applying to Ralph Nader's Public Citizen group. And Ralph Nader, who has had a long career and doing all sorts of things, but was a legal activist, okay, and went after GM, which was the biggest sort of company at the time, and with Harvard Law, like a lot of young, talented legal minds started a domestic attempt to sort of change corporate law from within. Okay, so Campaign GM was this effort to get General Motors in the 1970s to stop with the combustion engine, to go toward greener technology, to consider civil rights, right? To put a black pastor on their board. They wanted a female on the board, a black person on their board, an environmentalist on their board, rather than oil executives. Okay, there's no reason for them to be making cars that were based on oil, where the other technology was already available in the 1970s. Okay, so that's the first sort of salvo of that revolution. So this is, and then GM basically spied on him for years, and they admitted to that later on. They couldn't find anything because he was just kind of like a workaholic. But I don't know if my one else probably don't know yet about the Friedman Doctrine. If you take corporate law, you learn about shareholder supremacy. But Milton Friedman's social responsibility of business to increase profits is like the big sort of first salvo of the neoliberal revolution, and it's in direct response to the Campaign GM led by Ralph Nader. This is the Times excerpt where Friedman's article happens, where he says, look, the only social responsibility of corporations is to increase profits. Nader and them were saying, well, GM is the largest company on earth, right? It was the biggest supplier of weapons to the military, and they should think about the community. They should think about the country. They should think about where we're going in the future. Those are the Nader's Raiders below. Milton Friedman responds, no, the only responsibility of business is to increase profits for shareholder. So this is a shareholder supremacy doctrine that takes over corporate law. As Milton Friedman. Lewis Powell, he is also an interesting person. He was his famous, this is the Powell memo, an attack on American free enterprise. He actually singles out Ralph Nader as the most dangerous most dangerous antagonist to free enterprise, okay? And really convinces a lot of right-wing donors to, not just right-wing donors, but corporations to defend free enterprise against attacks, and to take the fight to the academy, right? To Harvard, to Yale, to these institutions of higher learning, which he feels are going anti-capitalist. Lewis Powell's also the Philip Morris lawyer who helped Philip Morris hide sort of the carcinogenic effects of cigarettes for many years. He's also a Richmond school board president who, during the Southern, instead of doing the resistance to Brown, says, no, let's not resist, but figures out a way to change the districting so that only 3 kids have to move schools after integration. So he's a very skilled legal operator. He also becomes a Supreme Court justice. He's one of Nixon's picks, a very, very effective Supreme Court justice, and I'll talk about his court in a second. And then there is this sort of less restrained, let's say, dog whistle capitalism of people like William Buckley and Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell is chancellor, whatever, in Great Britain, does this rivers of blood speech in the 1960s, saying, England is going to be filled with rivers of blood as these immigrants are coming, they're gonna take over, and the mongrelization of the race, just this blatantly racist response to immigration. And then by the end of the decade, he's talking about the debasement of money. So it really switches from, let's not talk about, immigrations and race, let's talk about a fixed monetary standard. William Buckley starts apartheid is good, segregation is good, and then becomes a free marketeer at the end of the decade. Okay, so there's this transition that I follow with some of these key players from starting the 1960s, segregation good, apartheid good, ending the 1960s as free marketeers. Okay, that's those are the more salient examples. George Stigler, who's the head of the Chicago sort of economic department, writes, who ends up becoming a big figure in antitrust and just generally free market guy, has no opinions on race, starts the decade again writing, instead of asking for jobs, why doesn't the Black community consider their inferiority as a race? Okay, that was an interesting find to that op-ed that isn't really part of his legacy, but was a motivator for these guys, right? Alan Greenspan is Nixon's advisor. Guess what? On what topic is Alan Greenspan's Nixon advisor on? Race. So Alan Greenspan writes Nixon a memo. This is as a advisor in the 1960s, so before he's president, on the urban crisis. Okay, that's the major crisis going into the election at the end of the 1960s. How do you get the civil rights movement going? You've got riots and protests across the country. How do you win as president and not deal with civil rights, right? Not do integration, not give anything. You have to win the South, right? If you're Nixon, and you got to get the Wallace vote without sort of losing the enlightened business vote. And so in this memo called The Urban Crisis, Alan Greenspan basically just says, look, the way to fix the ghetto is, which was created by policy, right? The ghetto was not a creation of capitalism, is to do nothing, because to do anything is anti-capitalist, okay? So really, this is the dawn of the use of free market capitalism, Black capitalism, against civil rights. Okay, this is Nixon's speech on civil rights, and if you see the top right there, it says "forget." Okay, and then he cross that out to say "go beyond." Okay, I found this in the Nixon archives, and it was like one of those, happy moments for me to see like that clearly what they're trying to do in a memo, right? They're trying to rhetorically stop civil rights, but not say that. And the way that they do it is to use this rhetoric of the free market. So So these were the Nixon advisors that were sort of part of this neoliberal core. Greenspan, George Shultz, head of the OMB, and the creation of the OMB comes exactly with the EPA. Thanks, Pat Buchanan, Robert Bork, Henry Kissinger. I won't go through all of these. The main funders of the neoliberal right after the Powell memo, the corporations that really step in to fund it, it's not like American corporations. It's basically 4 industries. It's the Coke, oil. It's oil, tobacco, and weapons. And if you think about what those industries are, they're the losers of the future, okay? Weapons, Eisenhower says as he's leaving office, do not let the military-industrial complex lead your policy. It's too powerful. It's got a motive of its own that is not our motive. He says for every tanker, we can have schools, we can have roads. We do not need to spend all of this money on war. Okay, but there is a war industry and it wants profits. Same with oil. It was already clear at the time that sucking carbon out of the earth through oil wasn't the future, okay? But there's oil interests like the Koch brothers, okay? And so, and then Philip Morris, who that was also a loser. There was clear scientifically that they were harming people. So that money goes into the creation of think tanks, Koch, Olin, Coors, William Simon. Also, the people who fund this are heirs. I found that also interesting. They're all heirs of fortune. These are not men, and they're all men who, except for like Betsy DeVos or whatever. They're people who don't know capitalism. These are the free markets boosters are all very wealthy scions of these big corporations, legacies. And then these are the institutions that they fund. And then, you have the Powell court slowly but surely overturning the gains of the civil rights movement, basically overturning Brown without saying so through these very sneaky court decisions. So I'll go through a few of them. Bakke, affirmative action, that's Nixon. Nixon pushes affirmative action, and then the Powell court does Bakke. It's not, no one on the left, none of the civil rights leaders asked for affirmative action. It's always rooted in this black capitalism thing. Roe versus Wade is actually Powell. So he gets this reputation for being this moderate. But then you have, First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti. It's this Massachusetts legislature says that you can't, if you're a corporation, you can't lobby on laws that affect you. Okay, and the court basically says that's against the First Amendment. This is Powell, opens the way up to Buckley versus Vallejo, which is also Powell, which opens up money in politics. And then just, Chevron, Marquette deregulates interest rates across the nation. All of these are Justice Powell, and they're not well-known cases. But if you look at chapter, I think 4 of my book, I go through these cases. He plants these little bombs that detonate later in Citizens United, in all of these Supreme Court decisions that essentially take out the rights of voters and transfer it to money. I'll skip that, FedSoc. And then there's the law and economics camps, summer camps for judges. Over 40% of sitting judges have attended a law and economics seminar. They're told that they're being taught economics, but they're being taught law and economics, which is an ideology that comes from very sort of specific view of economics, okay? There's a study that shows that the man judges, they call them man because it's the man lecturers, they're significantly more likely to rule pro-corporation, against labor laws, minimum wage laws, environmental laws, and higher sentencing. And then there's the Posner's, most cited legal scholar of all time. Some of his theories are writ large efficiency as a proxy for justice. Justice is too hard a notion to figure out, better to go for economic efficiency. Pareto, Coase theorem, all of these, those are the nubs of law and economics rather than economics itself, and really like become the DNA of the law. And you'll have to read, if you care more about this, the chapter, because it's too complicated probably for a slide. But we think sometimes that we're learning economics. Economics has moved on. Economics is not Pareto, Coase are not economic theories that economists would agree with. This is law in economics, okay? And it's very much an ideology that is rooted in a motive. So what are the fruits of the neoliberal movement? It's not less government, more freedom, more free markets, more capitalism. It's more laws, more complexity, more lobbying. Melissa Jacoby, if you were here last week for her lecture, talked about bankruptcy courts as becoming, that's one of the things that is I would say is the fruits of the neoliberal revolution, is you got, PG&E being convicted of manslaughter is able to go to bankruptcy courts to get out of those liabilities because of the, siloification of law. More technical, specialized regulations, more revolving doors, more loopholes. I'm almost done. I know I'm out of time. U.S. Steel says in 1960, U.S. Steel is no longer in the business of making steel. It's in the business of making profits. So you have the complete financialization of the market. This is my bread and butter. It's not, it's not that you get more free markets. It's that we become a financialized economy, okay? And finance is a realm that is fed, supported, and it's a growth of law. What is finance but law? It's new legal instruments. What are derivatives but new sort of ways of creating paper, abstract wealth through lobbying, essentially. And then there's political spending. Did you see Kamala Harris just raised $1 billion? That's unheard of. It's unprecedented. It's crazy. It's ludicrous to spend that much money on elections. And that's post-Buckley. Okay, I will end with this Baldwin quote that's in the front of the book, and let you, and just to say that it is ending, but the new world has yet to begin, and I think we're in another interregnum, just like the 1960s, and so I hope that we don't go the way the last time of a recreation of power through different means. I will open it up to questions. Thank you.
Hi. If we're in the interregnum right now, do you have any idea of what are the competing theories that might come to fruition?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you're in the exact right place. I think the law, again, the last time the battleground was in the law, and I think it is in the law. The law is a really powerful society-making tool, okay? And so understanding it and understanding the basis of it, going back to like what is it based on, that's important to not lose justice and fairness in the law. So really focusing on that. I think the competing things actually are, and one of the reasons I wrote the book is a lot of people take neoliberalism at its word that it's an economic theory, and then they want to say, well, look, the remedy to this is better economics. It's just better facts and more distribution, or more, if this says it's capitalism, then the good response has to be anti-capitalism. And I'm neither here nor there about that, but I'm saying this is not capitalism. This market is about laws and loopholes, and it's more, it resembles more corruption than it does capitalism. And I know that word may be controversial, but the closer you are to law, the more access to money and power you have. That's not capitalism. Look at our legal system, look at our regulatory state, that's not capitalism. So I think just really understanding it is first, and then going at it. So I would hope, my secret hope is that, there's a revival of the Nader, not the Nader tactics, because as I show in the book, those backfired, but the Nader idea of getting deeply into corporate law or securities law and figuring out how to make those more just. Okay, and that's been my whole lifelong mission as a scholar, is to get people who care about justice and equality into those technical money areas, because there's a lot of power on the table there. And it's being only fought over by the most interested industry insiders. And of course, if you're a banker, you're going to make laws that favor yourself. If you're a big pile of money, you're going to make laws that favor big piles of money, right? And where are the people in these? Well, they're not technically sophisticated enough to be in the debate, actually. and they have, a vote during presidential elections, but then, like we didn't get any banking nominees last time, right? We had a whole election and 4 years. We didn't get a presidentially elected, Senate confirmed nominee to do anything about banking law, which I find to be the most important, obviously, because I'm in it. But it's where the law says what is an asset, where can the money flow, right? So those are really, really important decisions that are being left essentially to industry itself to figure out. And that I don't find to be good.
Where do you place something like ESG? Is that a backlash to the neoliberal order? Is that the
Yeah.
neoliberal order co-opting some of the language of inclusion and resistance? Maybe we'd call that greenwashing.
Yeah.
Is it something else?
Both, because I think there are. I would put this. I would. I don't want to like mix it up by putting in other things like blockchain and other things like that. But there are a lot of responses to neoliberalism that are still stuck in that mindset, and it's not a problem, right? There's so many signs of like antibodies that are trying to get at the thing, right, to fix it, and ESG is definitely one. It's just that your options are limited to what the market rules are, right? And your monetary horizons and your like the options that you have are really stuck in the same system. But I think it's I think that is also the answer. The answer is also to use the law itself to create justice. The corporate law, I usually teach that. I'm not teaching it this semester, but corporate law is like a tool to be played with, essentially, at this point. You can make any corporation create any law you want, right? And really, why not, like, if you're interested in ESG, if you're interested in justice, why not use the corporate route, actually, right? Why not? Why keep pushing at these courts that take decades to turn, right? Why not use what they've given, the power of money, and use that to affect justice, to really get down into it? What do you need for a corporation? How do you increase money and leverage to actually do good? And how do you make a profit, right? Or not? How do you do a corporation that has, one share, one vote that gets enough people to share some egalitarian ESG motive or something? But you have to be creative, right? It can't be just like there isn't like a box so you just click it and put it in there. But ESG is definitely both, right?
I'm just wondering, because I hear you saying two things. Are you saying the master's tool should be used to dismantle the master's house?
Yeah.
But you're also saying
Yeah.
you kind of get locked into, you can't see creatively if you're stuck in the same framework?
Yeah.
So how does that work? And
Right. So I think the law is a tool. And it's not the master's tool, it's our tool, right? The democracy gives us the power to create laws. And so it's still our tools. There is no master here, but the law itself. And I think that we can, it's sort of to, declare, I understand what Audre Lorde was saying there, right? You're not going to defeat the system under its same principles. And I think that's part of it, under its same logic and thinking. But the law is a social construct. It's a creation that all of us participate in. And especially when we're talking about corporate law or securities law, these are meant to be enabling laws. They're meant to allow a group of people to create a structure of self-government, right? To then effectuate a purpose, okay? Thus far, it's been used for profit-making, one might say exploitation, but there's no reason for that to be so, right? In fact, the origins of corporate law, right? There was a debate at one point between John Stuart Mill and the other guys saying like maybe the corporation was the way toward liberty rather than the nation state. The charter, the Constitution is based on a corporate charter. Okay, these were flexible, malleable things. These were nation states / corporations at the time that both were created. Okay, so there isn't one that is more essentially democratic than the other. And I might say that the corporation is actually a faster way at this point than one person, one vote, because we've got the Electoral College and the Senate and all of these, blocks, purposefully so, to support, slavery, essentially, that are still, it's just too rigid, too hard to change, whereas a corporation isn't, okay? Now, I'm not saying the market's the answer, but I am saying that it's another tool. It's not the market versus the state. We're being tyrannized by both, essentially, right? Neither is more freeing or more liberty giving than the other. And both are broken. I think the market no longer works. It's not profitable, actually, because of these dead old industries got stuck in the law. We don't have a profitable market anymore. I mean, there's like finance is creating, it's like a risk merry-go-round that creates more of itself, more paper, more risk, but we're not actually producing. What kind of market doesn't produce enough homes for the people who want to buy them? Okay, there's too many regulations, too many laws gunking up the market structure. Look at our 401ks. They're just stuck until 65 in these legacy institutions, right? And it's kind of like, what do you call it? Co-risky, right? It's all contingent on the same industries profiting off the same models indefinitely, and that isn't sustainable, I think.
Hi, so this is the third Professor Baradaran book I've read, and the first two were
I have a fan in the room.
already incredibly full of information. But this one goes bigger.
It's a lot.
Bigger. It is a big think
a
of a
lot.
lot of things.
It's a
So
lot, yeah.
that leads me to a lot of questions. But I appreciate that often when people are critical of what's happened, there's an assumption that they are capitalist or anti-market, and I don't read at least the conclusion of your book as going there. So I appreciate that as well. What I thought I might maybe push you on, but just say that I'm not sure I fully understand the connection between these two things. You both argue, and really this comes from your prior books as well, about the financialization of the market, but also the extractive nature, or that it's not fully the people with the power don't want free competition. They want to rig the rules so that they can extract and have that concentration.
Yeah.
So my question is, are the financialization and that co-option for concentration, are they inherently linked? Couldn't you have one without the other? Could you have a financialized economy that still was competitive, and vice versa? Could you have, could you deal with the other piece as
That's
well?
a really good question. And I think, I haven't said it, but I think no. I think finance is a way that complexity is used against competition and toward, interests, what do you call it, special interests, right? Finance is the playing field of lawyers and bankers, and as such, and it is like inherently esoteric. It's inherently abstract, and that's good. I think finance is good. I think it's good to have risk sharing. It's good to have abstract ideas out there that can formulate coordination here. That's good. The financialization of the economy sort of is like the tail wagging the dog. Finance's purpose is to support growth and production and people, but finance itself becomes a self-reproducing mechanism. And so where I go in the book, actually the latter half, which I don't even get to in this, there's a lot in here, and I didn't even know how to do this talk. But capital has its own rules. Like once you create an idea, call it like a meme, right? It's like a gene self-reproduces. An idea or an ideology becomes self-reproducing itself, right? Capital just wants growth. It just wants yield, okay? So capital doesn't have a brain, it doesn't think, but it is an idea that is embedded in the market. And all capital wants is like 6% at least every year, and preferably every quarter. Okay, and so you have this growth of capital over here, and these abstract zeros and ones on these like endowments and private equity firms. It's just growing faster than it can even be spent on certain balance sheets out there, and then it's being extracted from the real world here. And so capital itself, I think, is a problem. The speed at which it's growing and the abstraction through which it's spiraling growth is stuck, and how far that is from the real economy, that's a problem. That's the biggest problem that the book kind of identifies, is and it's just so difficult to understand. I mean, I've been doing this for 15 years, and the chapter on capital I wrote, I think chapter 8, I had to rewrite 35 times just to make sure I was explaining it right, because you can't even use words anymore. There's so much bullshit in finance, right? When you try to say like financialization or capital markets or risk management, right? Just that term, I had to find other words to use, because, and it's this constant co-evolution of like people trying to explain it versus people trying to take advantage. And that finance is a lot of places, a lot of that battleground is in finance.
I was so tempted just to stop on that punch of finances. Thank you so much for this exhilarating conversation that, while terrifying, I think is ultimately hopeful.
It is hopeful.
And we,
yeah,
we really
yay.
appreciate your time. Thank you. This concludes our book series for the fall. So thank you all so much for coming. There are a few lunches left if anyone didn't get one. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.